Imagine you're sitting in an airport terminal in Doha.
Okay.
You've got a valid ticket, your bags are checked, and the weather outside is this absolutely perfect, clear 25 degrees.
That's pretty ideal, honestly.
Right. But then you look up, and the departures board just flips to red. Your flight home to Toronto is completely canceled.
Oh, wow. Just out of nowhere.
Just out of nowhere.
Hmm.
And it's not because of a mechanical failure. It's not a labor strike or, a local storm.
Let me guess. It's something entirely disconnected from the actual airport.
Exactly. It's because a cargo ship was rerouted, like
Yeah.
2,000 miles away in the Strait of Hormuz. And because of that, your particular plane simply does not have the physical fuel to make the trip.
Yeah, that is the terrifying reality of where we are right now.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are looking at why the fundamental laws of global travel have quietly and completely broken down.
They really have. It's a completely transformed landscape of global mobility in the year 2026.
Yeah, and we've brought in a massive stack of sources to make sense of this today. We're talking dense government travel advisories, high-level geopolitical risk analyses, internal corporate mobility reports, and even some pretty scary biosecurity health notices.
It's a lot of material to get through.
It is, but our mission today is to decode all of this.
Right.
To find out what is actually happening behind the scenes.
And it's a fascinating, if, somewhat intimidating shift, because we are moving entirely away from how we understood international travel just a few short years ago.
Right.
The old rules simply don't apply anymore.
And that is exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We want to equip you, the listener, with the critical strategic knowledge you need to navigate a world where a conflict on one continent can literally strand you on another.
Yeah, because this isn't just about figuring out how to pack a lighter carry-on bag anymore.
No, not at all. Or,
Yeah.
Reminding you to wear your backpack on your chest to avoid pickpockets at a tourist destination. I mean, that's still good advice, but this is about understanding systemic global vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. The core theme running through every single document we are looking at today is that travel risk is no longer just a localized issue.
It's about global network contagion, catastrophic fuel shortages, and incredibly complex biosecurity, right?
Exactly. The illusion of the isolated, carefree vacation is effectively over.
Wow. That's a heavy way to put it, but it seems true.
It is. I mean, you can't just drop a pin on a map and assume the only things you need to worry about are within, like, a 5-mile radius of your resort. The risks are networked now.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand why the typical travel advice of 2019 no longer works in 2026, we first have to look at the macro-level economic and geopolitical shocks, the things that are breaking the literal engines of global transit.
Right, we have to start with the physical logistics. Because before you can even begin to worry about local crime or hotel standards at your destination, you have to look at the massive shift in the international security landscape.
Which has been wild lately.
It has. In 2026, the defining characteristic of travel risk isn't actually on the ground. It is the systemic disruption of the aviation industry itself.
But hold on, I mean, the aviation industry has dealt with shocks before, right? We've had pandemics, ash clouds, global recessions.
Oh, for sure.
So why is the current instability in the Middle East causing such a unique structural breakdown for, say, an airline operating out of North America?
Well, it really comes down to geography
Yeah.
and the hyper-efficiency of modern supply chains.
Okay.
We are seeing localized military conflicts and regional instability in the Middle East, specifically surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, effectively closing off one of the world's most critical arteries.
Let's give everyone a quick geography refresher just to be safe. The Strait of Hormuz is that very narrow bottleneck between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, right?
That's the one.
It separates Iran from the Arabian Peninsula.
Yes. And its importance really cannot be overstated. It is arguably the single most important transit choke point in the world.
For oil, right?
Not just for crude oil, but crucially for refined petroleum products. And aviation relies on highly refined, specialized jet fuel.
Ah, okay.
Because the shipping corridors through the strait have faced effective closure or, severe restriction due to the conflict, we aren't just seeing a delay in shipments.
What are we seeing then?
We are seeing a complete disruption in the availability of jet fuel on a global scale. The geopolitical risk analyses we reviewed show a staggering 84% surge in jet fuel prices.
Wait, an 84% increase?
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that. How does an airline even absorb a cost spike like that? Don't they hedge their fuel prices years in advance to prevent exactly this scenario?
They do utilize fuel hedging,
Yeah,
yes, which is essentially, locking in a price for future fuel purchases to protect against market volatility.
right.
But here's the problem. Hedging only protects the financial balance sheet. It does not physically put fuel into the tanks of an airplane at a specific airport on a specific Tuesday.
Right. The fuel still has to actually exist and be there.
Exactly. And this is where we encounter what the analysts call the global network contagion effect.
Okay, explain how that contagion actually works in practice, because the term sounds like a virus.
In a way, it acts like one across the logistical network. Because of the conflict, vast swaths of airspace over the Middle East and Eastern Europe are restricted, or just entirely closed to commercial aviation.
So they have to go around.
Right. Flights that are still operating have to take significant, often massive detours to avoid these no-fly zones.
Which means they are spending a lot more hours in the air.
Precisely. And when an aircraft flies a longer diverted route, it burns significantly more fuel.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. So at the exact moment that global jet fuel supplies are choked off by the Strait of Hormuz closure, airlines are being forced to consume higher quantities of fuel just to complete their standard long-haul routes.
That is a brutal feedback loop. You burn more fuel during a global shortage, which just exacerbates the very crisis you are trying to navigate.
It's a nightmare for the planners. The economic and physical pressure on major carriers is just immense. The reports highlight that carriers like Air Canada and WestJet are being forced to implement abrupt, large-scale schedule adjustments.
And we aren't talking about them just, like, tweaking their winter schedule 6 months in advance, are we?
No, we are talking about abrupt cancellations.
Wow.
A plane arrives in Frankfurt from Toronto, and it simply cannot source enough fuel at an affordable rate to make the return journey or the onward journey to Asia. So the flight is just scrubbed, passengers are stranded.
Travel used to be like a point-to-point train ride. You buy a ticket, you get there.
Exactly.
Now it's like a global game of dominoes.
Yeah.
A piece falls in the Middle East, and suddenly your connection in Europe is canceled because the plane literally doesn't have fuel.
That is the perfect way to visualize it.
Yeah.
This is the transition from a localized, destination-specific risk to a systemic network vulnerability.
And the network itself is fragile.
Very. And the dominoes keep falling even after you touch down. The Global Affairs Canada advisories are actively warning travelers about destination-level rationing right now.
I saw that in the notes, the knock-on effects.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like on the ground for a traveler?
Well, imagine you are flying through a major transit hub. Places like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, or Doha.
The massive ones.
Yeah, these airports are designed to process huge volumes of passengers with incredible efficiency. But because of the rerouted flights and the fuel scarcity, these hubs are experiencing severe cascading delays.
Because everyone is waiting for fuel.
Right. Planes are stacking up, waiting for their fuel allocations, and this strains the physical airport infrastructure to the breaking point. Terminals become completely overcrowded, baggage systems fail, security lines become unmanageable.
So even if your flight eventually gets fuel, you might spend 20 hours sleeping on the floor of a terminal.
Yes. And it extends beyond the airport walls, too. The fuel rationing isn't just for aviation.
What do you mean?
In many of these heavily impacted regions, there are strict local fuel rationing measures in place for ground transport as well.
Oh, man.
So let's say you finally clear customs after a grueling delay. You walk out to the curb and you realize you can't get a taxi.
Because they have no gas.
Exactly. Ride shares are paralyzed, public transit schedules are slashed, even the delivery of essential goods to hotels and grocery stores is impacted because the delivery trucks don't have diesel.
So if the plane can't fly, you're stuck. And if the taxis can't drive, you're stranded at the airport.
We're completely immobilized.
Which brings up a terrifying question. Who pays for your hotel while you wait?
Yeah, that's the big one.
Because the physical logistics of travel breaking down means the traditional safety nets that travelers historically relied upon are also collapsing under the pressure.
That's exactly right.
Which brings us to the actual government travel advisories themselves and the hidden realities of travel insurance. Let's get into that.
This is a crucial pivot because in 2026, understanding the paperwork is just as important as carrying your physical passport.
Seriously.
The Canadian government, like many others, uses a standardized four-tiered advisory system to communicate risk to its citizens.
I think a lot of people see these advisories as just like friendly suggestions, or they look at a color-coded map online and don't realize the massive legal and financial weight those colors carry. Walk us through the tiers.
Sure. The baseline is level 1, which is take normal security precautions.
Okay, that sounds standard.
It is. This essentially means you should exercise the same situational awareness you would walking around your hometown in Canada.
Makes sense.
Then level 2 elevates to exercise a high degree of caution. This means there are specific, identifiable concerns, maybe a spike in petty crime or a localized health outbreak.
So you just need to be more vigilant.
Exactly. You need to be actively vigilant. And it's important to note that under levels 1 and 2, your standard travel insurance policies remain completely valid.
But level 3 is where the ground falls out from under you.
It really is.
Level 3 is avoid non-essential travel.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, level 3 is the critical threshold. It is not a suggestion. The moment a destination or even a specific region within a destination is elevated to level 3, it constitutes an official government warning.
And what does that official status actually do?
That official status can, and often does, automatically trigger the cancellation of your travel insurance policies. Or at the very least, it provides insurers with the legal grounds to refuse any claims related to the identified risks in that advisory.
Wow.
And then, of course, there is level 4, avoid all travel, which means your personal safety is at extreme risk, the government is explicitly stating they cannot help you, and standard insurance is entirely void across the board.
Wait, let's slow down and focus intensely on that level 3 threshold for a moment.
Okay.
Because you're saying my insurance could just evaporate. If I bought a premium trip cancellation policy, like a year in advance, and then a conflict breaks out a week before my trip, pushing the destination to level 3, I could just be out thousands of dollars.
Right. Under the new 2026 frameworks, yes, you very well could be.
That is wild.
Because of the global network contagion we discussed, major insurance providers have completely rewritten their terms and conditions. The reports we analyzed specifically cite providers like Manulife introducing incredibly strict new exclusion.
Well, what are they excluding exactly? Like, what's the actual wording?
They are specifically targeting cancellations and trip interruptions linked to fuel shortages or regional conflicts.
Oh, wow, they just name it directly.
Exactly. Prior to these massive logistical breakdowns, insurers might have covered a cancellation if your airline suddenly folded or an unforeseen event grounded flights.
Well, that used to be the whole point of the insurance.
Exactly. But now, because fuel scarcity and geopolitical conflict are considered known, ongoing global risks, they are actively carving them out of the coverage.
So, what does this all mean for the average person? You buy trip cancellation insurance thinking you're safe. But if the airline cancels because of a global fuel shortage, you might just be entirely out of luck.
You might be.
The airline blames the fuel crisis, the insurance company points to the exclusion clause, and you're just left holding the bag.
What's fascinating here is the massive structural transfer of liability. Risk has been entirely offloaded from the massive institutions, meaning the airlines, the multinational insurers, and even the government, directly onto the shoulders of the individual traveler.
It's all on you now.
It really is. If you read the fine print in the 2026 government advisories, there is a chilling, explicit statement. The Canadian government states clearly that they will not provide financial assistance to travelers who are stranded abroad due to flight cancellations, airspace closures, or fuel shortages.
That is so sobering.
Yeah.
If you get stuck in a transit hub in the Middle East for 2 weeks, paying for inflated hotel rooms and airport food, that is entirely your financial problem.
Completely. The official advice now dictates that any traveler venturing abroad must carry a significant financial buffer.
How significant?
They are advising people to have enough liquid funds, meaning accessible cash or high-limit credit cards, to cover an unplanned extra 2 to 3 weeks of lodging, meals, and potentially an exorbitantly priced last-minute alternative flight on a different carrier.
2 to 3 extra weeks. That's thousands and thousands of dollars just sitting in reserve.
Most people don't travel with that kind of buffer.
No, they definitely don't.
Yeah.
And it isn't just the leisure travelers getting caught in this bureaucratic nightmare. I want to bring in the corporate mobility perspective, because the internal reports from Visa HQ paint a chaotic picture for employers, too.
Corporate travel is a mess right now.
They are bound by something called duty of care, right? What does that actually mean when the world is this unstable?
Duty of care is a legal and ethical obligation that a company has to ensure the safety and well-being of its employees when they are traveling or deployed for work.
Okay.
From an employer's standpoint, this is a massive liability in 2026. They are required by law to monitor these government travel advisories in real time.
So they can't just ignore it.
No. If a country where they have staff on the ground suddenly jumps from level 2 to level 3, the employer cannot just tell their staff to, be careful.
Right.
They have to immediately reevaluate their evacuation protocols and verify if their corporate insurance coverage has been voided by the advisory change.
And the Visa HQ report mentioned a massive spike in corporate itinerary changes happening within hours of advisories going live.
Yes. Corporations are having to scramble. If a risk profile spikes, they have to quickly rotate staff out of the high-risk zone and into safer regional hubs like Warsaw or Doha, assuming, of course, that the fuel situation allows them to even charter a flight out.
But what I found wild in the notes was that bringing an employee home early actually triggers domestic financial penalties for the company.
It does. It's so convoluted.
What does an underused housing tax have to do with evacuating someone from a global conflict zone? I couldn't believe this part.
This is a perfect example of how complex the bureaucracy has become. Let's say a Canadian company has an executive stationed in a foreign country, and they rent a corporate apartment for her back in Toronto so she has a place when she returns.
Makes sense.
Suddenly, a geopolitical crisis erupts. The foreign destination hits level 4, and the company rightly evacuates her to a safe third country while they figure things out.
So far, so good. They kept her safe.
Right. But her Toronto apartment is now sitting completely empty for months. Because of new Canadian housing laws designed to combat the domestic housing crisis by stopping property hoarding, that empty corporate apartment suddenly triggers a massive vacancy penalty under the underused housing tax.
Wait, really?
Yes.
The company is literally facing complex domestic tax reporting requirements and potential financial penalties, precisely because they acted responsibly to save their employee abroad.
That's exactly what's happening, and that's to say nothing of the tax equalization rules that get triggered if an employee is forced to reside in a high-tax third-party jurisdiction for longer than anticipated.
It's an absolute bureaucratic labyrinth. You're fighting the geopolitical crisis on one front and domestic tax law on the other.
Which is why the #1 universal piece of advice for any Canadian traveling right now, whether for a 2-week vacation or a 6-month corporate assignment, is to immediately register with the ROCA service.
That's the registration of Canadians abroad, right?
Correct. It is a free, confidential service provided by Global Affairs Canada. It allows the government to know roughly where you are.
Yeah.
And more importantly, it allows them to send you direct emergency notifications about natural disasters, civil unrest, or sudden changes to the advisory levels.
That sounds like a good idea.
It is, but the 2026 advisories feature a very stark, explicit caveat regarding ROCA.
They want to make sure you know it's not a panic button that summons a rescue helicopter, don't they?
Exactly. The government stresses that registering with ROCA is absolutely not a guarantee of rescue or extraction.
Wow.
If you choose to remain in or travel to a level 3 or level 4 zone, consular assistance is severely limited. If the local infrastructure collapses, the Canadian embassy staff might be evacuating themselves. You are fundamentally on your own.
That is chilling.
It really changes how you view a trip.
Since the financial and consular safety nets are effectively gone in high-risk scenarios, I think it is critical we map out exactly where the government's highest level of warning, Level 4, avoid all travel, is currently applied, and why.
Yeah, let's look at the map.
Because the landscape in 2026 represents a historic peak of these extreme designations. We aren't just talking about a handful of isolated incidents anymore.
No, the map of global instability has expanded significantly and interconnected in ways we just haven't seen in decades. When we look at the data, there are essentially 3 main geographic theaters driving these level 4 warnings right now.
Okay, what are they?
The Middle East and North Africa, the Sahel region in sub-Saharan Africa, and Eastern Europe.
Let's start with the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region. Looking impartially at the government advisories, this is the epicenter of the active traditional conflict zones.
Yes, it is.
We see that Israel, Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon are all under the highest level 4 warning.
The security implications in these areas are severe and highly volatile. In Israel, the warnings specifically detail ongoing military operations, the frequent implementation of shelter-in-place orders, and a persistent high risk of targeted attacks in public spaces.
Right, the advisory includes a documented threat of stabbings and vehicle ramming incidents.
Exactly. And then when you look at Gaza and the West Bank, the advisories describe dire humanitarian conditions, massive infrastructure damage, and a highly unpredictable security environment marked by the use of improvised explosive devices, or IEDs.
And Lebanon is also at level 4.
Right, driven by escalating regional tensions, the high risk of border conflicts, and a critical warning regarding very limited exit options if the commercial airspace is suddenly closed.
So that is the reality of an active kinetic conflict zone. It's a war zone.
Yes.
But then you look at the Sahel region in Africa,
Right.
countries like Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso,
Yeah.
and Sudan. The dynamics there feel entirely different.
They are. Sudan is a particularly tragic and volatile situation in 2026.
What's the specific threat there?
The intelligence reports highlight the complete collapse of a fragile, internationally brokered ceasefire. This collapse has led to renewed, unpredictable missile strikes and a total breakdown of public order and essential services across major urban centers. It is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
But you're right, when we look at the broader Sahel, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the primary driver for the level 4 warning shifts, it isn't necessarily state-on-state warfare.
It's the kidnappings, right?
Yes, the massive risk there is the extreme systemic prevalence of kidnapping for ransom.
And this isn't like isolated crime. These are highly organized insurgent groups operating across vast, porous national borders.
Yes, these are sophisticated networks that specifically target foreigners, humanitarian workers, and corporate personnel. The threat is ubiquitous, and the local security forces often lack the capacity to maintain control outside of major capital cities.
Okay, so that's the second theater. But then we come to a third category of level 4 destinations. And this is where I think the nature of the threat completely morphs into something modern travelers just aren't used to thinking about.
It's a huge shift in tactics.
We're talking about Eastern Europe, specifically Russia and Belarus, alongside the devastating ongoing active conflict in Ukraine, particularly focused around Odessa. And we also see a very specific mirrored threat profile in Iran.
This raises an important question about how we as travelers define a threat.
How so?
Well, if you look at Ukraine, the threat is obvious and physical. Active military operations, the use of heavy artillery, and widespread missile strikes targeting infrastructure.
Very clear physical danger.
Exactly. But when you look at the level 4 designations for Russia, Belarus, and Iran, the primary warning isn't just about an active battlefield. It is about the deeply unpredictable, politicized enforcement of local laws. It is about the very real, very high risk of arbitrary detention.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's almost like a dark geopolitical game of chess, and everyday tourists or dual citizens are literally being used as pawns for diplomatic leverage. I mean, how does that even work?
It is exactly that, and it represents a terrifying evolution in statecraft. Diplomatic kidnapping or, state-sponsored hostage-taking fundamentally changes the nature of travel risk.
It changes everything.
Historically, our baseline assumption as travelers has always been, if you don't break the local laws, if you aren't smuggling contraband, and if you don't wander into dangerous neighborhoods at night, you are generally safe.
Right. Just keep your head down and you'll be fine.
Exactly. But in these specific level 4 zones in 2026, your behavior is largely irrelevant. Your passport alone makes you a target.
So wait, I could be sitting in a cafe in Tehran or Moscow, drinking a coffee, completely obeying the law, and be arrested simply because I hold a Canadian passport.
Yes. The authorities in countries like Iran have a heavily documented history of detaining foreign nationals, and particularly dual nationals, on entirely fabricated charges like espionage or subversion.
Why do they do it?
They do this specifically to exert political or diplomatic influence in international negotiations with Western governments. You are not a criminal to them, you are a bargaining chip.
And if you become a bargaining chip, the Canadian government has already stated that in level 4 zones, their ability to provide consular assistance is non-existent.
Yeah.
They can't just send a lawyer to get you out.
They cannot. The advisories are explicitly stating, if you travel here against our advice and you are detained, we cannot facilitate your release.
Wow.
The diplomatic channels are either severed or highly compromised.
Okay, so while those level 4 zones are obvious no-goes for almost everyone, let's be realistic here. The vast majority of our listeners aren't booking their summer vacations to active conflict zones.
Probably not.
And they aren't looking to test the waters in countries known for diplomatic kidnapping. The more insidious hidden risks, the ones most likely to actually impact our audience, lie in the incredibly popular level 2 destinations that everyone generally assumes are perfectly safe.
You've hit on what I call the level 2 illusion.
The level 2 illusion, I like that phrase.
Exercise a high degree of caution. This is where travel risk becomes highly compartmentalized, incredibly niche, and frankly, very deceptive. A country might have a blanket level 2 rating, but beneath that surface, the risks fluctuate wildly.
Yeah, we really need to look closely at countries like Mexico, India, and France to understand this. Let's start with Mexico, because the data reveals a massive paradox.
It really does.
According to a major leisure survey conducted in 2026, 17% of Canadians actually feel that Mexico is safer to visit than the United States.
That statistic always blows my mind.
And the tourism numbers back that up. Mexico has officially dethroned the U.S. as the #1 international destination for Canadians. Between January and October of 2025 alone, they welcomed over 2 million Canadian visitors.
Which is nearly 13% of all Mexico's international arrivals.
Exactly. It is an absolute powerhouse of a tourism market.
Mhm.
Millions of people go every year and have wonderful, completely safe experiences.
Absolutely. And yet the country carries a nationwide level 2 advisory, which is absolutely littered with intense level 3 and level 4 regional warnings.
Right. You look at the government map of Mexico, and it looks like a patchwork quilt of danger zones. There are entire states like Sinaloa, Michoacan, and Guerrero that carry strict avoid non-essential travel warnings.
And the reasons listed are severe. High levels of cartel-related violence, pervasive organized crime, and regular violent clashes between rival armed groups.
And yet, tourists are flocking there in record numbers, especially with the FIFA World Cup 2026 coming up this June and July, which is being co-hosted across Canada, the U.S., and Mexico.
Oh, the World Cup brings an entirely new, massive layer of security advice. Millions of fans will be navigating between these highly varied security zones.
It's going to be wild.
But the paradox of Mexican tourism exists because the Mexican authorities have made massive concerted efforts to insulate and protect the major lucrative tourist destinations.
So they keep the resorts safe.
Yes. The horrific gang-related violence you read about is often geographically isolated from the all-inclusive resorts. However, the advisories are unflinchingly clear. Violent crime, including homicides and kidnappings, still occurs in major cities and popular tourist areas. Innocent bystanders have been caught in the crossfire.
So are those 17% of Canadians who think it's safer than the U.S. just uninformed? Or is it that if you stick to the authorized cabs and daylight hours common sense rules, the risk is actually manageable?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it tells us that in 2026, risk is measured block by block.
Block by block.
A massive country like Mexico is not uniformly safe, nor is it uniformly dangerous. The 17% who feel completely safe are likely the demographic who fly directly into an airport in Cancun or Los Cabos, take a prearranged authorized hotel shuttle directly to a gated resort, and actively curate their environment.
Right. They aren't renting cars and driving down rural highways in Michoacan at night.
Exactly.
But the really fascinating and frankly scary part of the Mexico advisory isn't just the physical cartel violence. It's the highly specific, incredibly sophisticated niche scams that actively target tourists right inside those quote-unquote safe zones.
Yes, the scams are next level.
Let's talk about the mechanics of virtual kidnappings, because this sounds like psychological warfare.
That's a very accurate description, actually. Virtual kidnappings are a form of extortion that relies entirely on psychological manipulation and the exploitation of modern telecommunications.
So no one is actually kidnapped.
Correct. The criminals trick a family into paying a massive ransom for a tourist who hasn't actually been captured. The victim is just temporarily unreachable.
Walk me through exactly how that plays out. Let's say I'm staying at a hotel in Mexico City. How do they get me?
Typically, the criminals will call you directly on your hotel room phone, completely bypassing your cell phone.
Wait, really? Just straight to the room phone?
Yeah, exactly, because they know you'll answer it.
Yeah.
And when you answer, they might pose as local police, immigration officials, or heavily armed cartel members.
Oh, wow.
They use aggressive threats, shouting, and whatever personal information they've managed to scrape about you, from compromised hotel Wi-Fi or social media, to terrify you.
That is so invasive.
Their goal is to convince you that your life is in immediate danger, and they force you to turn off your personal cell phone immediately.
They tell you to turn it off.
Yes. They might order you to isolate yourself in the bathroom, or even command you to leave and check into a different specific hotel under a fake name, warning that they are watching your every move.
So now my phone is off, and I'm hiding in a bathroom somewhere.
Exactly. You are now in a self-imposed communication blackout. The moment your phone is off, the criminals call your family back home in Canada.
Oh, no.
They say they have violently kidnapped you, which seems entirely plausible to your family when they frantically try to call your cell phone and it goes straight to voicemail.
That is brilliant and evil.
The criminals demand an immediate ransom via wire transfer, threatening to kill you if the family contacts the actual authorities or the embassy.
That is utterly terrifying.
Yeah.
The family panics, assumes the worst, and wires the money to save a loved one who is actually just sitting in a hotel bathroom waiting for instructions.
It is incredibly lucrative, and it preys entirely on fear and the inability to verify information.
And it isn't just the terrifying stuff. There are massive financial traps, too. The advisory specifically calls out timeshare fraud.
Yes, that's a huge one.
They describe members of criminal groups wearing fake badges, posing as real estate representatives. They approach tourists who already own timeshares, offering to buy their properties for huge, above-market amounts to use as corporate retreats.
Sounds too good to be true.
Right. But then they demand massive administrative fees or foreign tax payments up front via wire transfer before disappearing into the wind.
It's a classic advance fee scam, but highly tailored to the tourist demographic. And what most tourists don't know, and what the fraudulent agents obviously try to hide, is the law.
How is the law?
Both Canadian and Mexican consumer protection laws mandate a strict 5-day cooling-off window. You have the legal right to cancel any timeshare contract within 5 days without a single penalty.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Most people don't. The scammers will often try to make victims sign a waiver giving up that specific right, which, under Mexican law, is completely illegal and unenforceable.
The advisory also dives into online romance scams, where seniors traveling to Mexico to meet someone they've been talking to online are targeted. They are seduced, manipulated, and eventually tricked or violently coerced into serving as drug couriers, carrying gifts or packages across the border.
It's heartbreaking how they target vulnerable people.
And on top of all the crime, there are bizarre new legal quirks that can land a tourist in jail. For instance, Mexico has completely, unequivocally banned the importation of vaping devices.
Yes, that catches a lot of people off guard.
It's illegal, period. If a tourist absentmindedly leaves an e-cigarette in their carry-on, customs can confiscate it, and you can be subjected to massive fines or even prolonged detention.
It really highlights why you have to read the advisory for your specific destination, not just rely on word of mouth. The level of granular detail is astounding.
It really is.
Look at a place like Mazatlan in the state of Sinaloa. The state itself is largely a no-go Level 3 zone because of intense armed clashes between cartels and security forces. But the government advisory carves out a hyper-specific, almost surgical exception for Mazatlan.
What's the exception?
It is considered safe enough to visit, but only if you restrict your movements entirely to the Golden Zone and the historic town center. And only if you arrive and depart directly by air. If you drive out of that zone, you are in Level 3 territory.
It's a geopolitical tightrope.
Okay.
Let's look at another massive Level 2 destination with incredibly complex regional risks: India.
India is a phenomenal, deeply culturally rich destination, but it is maintained at a blanket Level 2, primarily due to the persistent, ongoing threat of terrorist attacks throughout the country.
And unlike the Middle East, these aren't always international terror syndicates, right?
Correct. Many of these attacks are perpetrated by domestic Maoist extremist insurgents known as Naxalites.
Wait, what exactly is a Naxalite? I don't think most people are familiar with that term in North America.
The Naxalites are a group of far-left radical communists drawing their ideology from Mao Zedong. They have been waging a low-intensity, protracted insurgency against the Indian government for decades.
Where do they operate mostly?
Primarily in the rural, forested areas of eastern and central India. They frequently target government infrastructure, police forces, and transit networks. For a traveler, the danger is that their attacks are highly unpredictable and often occur in crowded transit hubs, local markets, or near government buildings. You could simply be in the wrong train station at the wrong time.
And just like Mexico, India has severe regional carve-outs that completely change the risk profile.
Very severe.
The Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, for instance, is a strict Level 4 avoid-all-travel zone due to intense militancy, frequent terrorist attacks, and unpredictable civil unrest. The border areas within 10 kilometers of Pakistan are also Level 4. And not just because of military tension, but because of the horrific, lingering risk of landmines and unexploded ordnance.
That's a terrifying thought.
And the northeastern state of Manipur is at Level 3 due to violent ethnic tensions and active insurgency.
Right, and beyond the geopolitical violence, a traveler in India has to navigate highly unique cultural and legal risks that simply do not exist in the West.
Like what?
Well, for example, several Indian states have enacted strict legal prohibitions on the slaughter of cows and the consumption of beef. The advisories contain explicit warnings about cow vigilantes.
Cow vigilantes.
Yes, groups that have been known to physically attack and sometimes kill individuals they suspect of possessing or consuming beef. There were also severe warnings regarding commercial surrogacy, which is facing sweeping new legal bans, and an absolute non-negotiable prohibition on tourists carrying satellite phones or standalone GPS devices without prior explicit licensing from the Indian government.
Wait, I can't bring a sat phone.
If you are caught with a satellite phone, you will be arrested under national security laws.
Okay, so we've looked at the complexity of Mexico and India. Let's look at France.
Oh, France.
For many, it's the classic romantic Western European vacation. But reading the 2026 advisory for France feels like reading a security briefing for a forward operating base. France maintains something called the Vigiparate Plan.
Yes. The Vigiparate Plan is France's national security alert system. Currently, it is elevated to its highest possible tier, the urgence attempt or attack emergency level.
And that's not just paperwork.
No, this isn't just a heightened state of awareness for the intelligence agencies. It has a very visible physical manifestation on the streets through Operation Sentinel.
Operation Sentinel is the actual deployment of the French armed forces, right?
Precisely. It involves the deployment of thousands of heavily armed military units to actively assist the civilian police in patrolling high-risk public areas. They were stationed at major tourist attractions, outside religious institutions, and heavily patrolling the transport hubs.
It is a profoundly jarring thing for a tourist. You step out of the metro, expecting to have a croissant and look at the Eiffel Tower, and you are immediately passed by a squad of soldiers in full tactical gear carrying assault rifles.
It changes the psychological atmosphere of the vacation completely.
I bet.
But the military patrols aren't there for pickpockets. The advisory also warns incredibly heavily about highly organized petty crime, specifically on the regional transit networks. The RER train networks in Paris, which connect the city to the airports and suburbs, and the international rail routes like the Eurostar from Paris to London are major hotspots.
The reports highlight how coordinated these thieves are. They use sophisticated distraction tactics. Someone drops a handful of coins or a group of people aggressively bump into you at the train doors right as they are closing, and before you realize what happened, your passport and wallet are gone and the train is moving.
And losing your passport in France introduces you to the labyrinth of local bureaucracy. But there is another crucial, highly specific legal warning for France that tourists frequently run afoul of: the strict national ban on concealing your face in public spaces.
Right. The law dictates that you cannot wear anything that covers your face. Balaclavas, full-face veils, certain types of heavy masks, and this law applies everywhere, including the public arrival areas of international airports.
Exactly. There are absolutely no exemptions for tourists, and the French government permits no religious exemptions. If you cover your face in a public space, you will be confronted by authorities and you will be fined.
It just continually highlights how compartmentalized and specific risk has become. You have to actively curate your environment and be acutely, almost obsessively aware of local laws.
You really do.
But this need for hypervigilance isn't just about avoiding cartel violence or pickpockets on a Parisian train. Increasingly, some of the most stressful, legally precarious encounters a traveler will face are with official bureaucracies and border controls. And sometimes that happens right next door.
It is a vital observation. Bureaucracy has truly become the new border wall.
The new border wall.
The physical checkpoints of the past are increasingly backed up by massive, interconnected, administrative and biometric surveillance systems, particularly within the Americas.
Let's look closely at the United States. It's a level 1 destination. Take normal security precautions. Though I should note, the advisory does contain a standing, prominent warning for Canadians regarding the high rates of civilian firearm possession and the frequency of mass shootings in the U.S.
Yes, that is prominently listed.
But the border dynamics are where the anxiety really spikes for travelers. On January 1st, 2026, something called the Restricting Foreign Nationals Proclamation took effect. What is that?
This proclamation represents a significant, aggressive policy shift in U.S. border security. It is essentially throwing a massive biometric dragnet over the ports of entry. We are seeing mandatory facial recognition scans and the collection of digital fingerprints implemented at almost all land, air, and sea borders.
Oh.
But the most invasive and controversial aspect for the average traveler is the sweeping policy regarding the search of electronic devices.
The advisories state that U.S. border agents, the CBP, have the legal authority to search your personal phone or your work laptop without stating any probable cause. They don't need a warrant.
That is correct. At the border, your expectation of privacy is essentially zero. They can demand you hand over your unlocked phone so they can review your text messages, your social media accounts, and your emails.
And what happens if you refuse? What if you say, no, there is sensitive corporate data on this laptop, or I don't want you reading my personal texts, and you just refuse to give them your password?
If you refuse to provide the password, the agents have the authority to legally seize the device entirely. Seize it. Like, keep it.
They can hold it for weeks or months for forensic analysis. Furthermore, because you are a foreign national requesting entry, they can and likely will simply deny you entry into the United States and put you on a flight back to Canada. You have no constitutional right to refuse the search if you wish to cross that border.
It's an incredible amount of power at a single checkpoint. And there's another bureaucratic hurdle at the U.S. border mentioned in the advisories, specifically regarding gender identity on passports.
Yes, the Canadian government issues passports with an X-gender identifier for individuals who do not identify exclusively as male or female.
Right.
The explicit warning in the 2026 advisory states that the current legacy systems used by U.S. transit authorities and border enforcement may simply lack the technical capability to recognize or process the X identifier.
So the computer throws an error and the traveler is just stuck? Precisely. This lack of system integration can lead to severe administrative delays, prolonged secondary questioning, or potentially being denied entry entirely simply because the database cannot parse the data field on a legally valid Canadian passport.
So crossing a border has evolved from showing a stamped piece of paper at a toll booth to undergoing a high-stakes, deeply invasive digital and biometric audit where a dead phone battery, a refused password, or a database error could literally ruin your trip or trap you.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, administrative compliance has become just as critical to your overall travel safety as avoiding physical crime.
Absolutely.
And that is a perfect segue to the situation in the Caribbean, because the bureaucratic traps there are arguably far worse. They just lack the high-tech veneer of the U.S. border. Let's take Cuba, for example.
Cuba is a massively popular destination for Canadians, but the country is currently dealing with its worst, most systemic economic crisis in decades. The advisory paints a bleak picture, warning of chronic, nationwide shortages of basic food, fuel, and vital medication.
It's a very tough situation on the ground.
The power outages are so frequent and prolonged that they actively impact the basic services at the luxury resorts, including the ability to pump clean water.
The physical conditions are challenging, but the bureaucratic trap hidden in the advisory specifically targets a very specific demographic: Canadian permanent residents. Under Cuban law, to exit the country, a Canadian permanent resident must present their valid physical Canadian PR card to the authorities.
Okay, but what happens if that card is lost? You leave your wallet on the beach in Veradero, or it gets stolen from your hotel room. You still have your passport from your home country, right? Can't you just hop on your return Air Canada flight?
No, you cannot.
Wait, really?
Without that physical PR card, Cuban immigration will not let you board the plane. You are grounded. You have to formally apply for a replacement travel document from the Canadian Embassy in Havana.
That sounds like a hassle, but embassies handle that stuff all the time, right?
Yeah. They do, but the critical detail in the advisory is the timeline. The Canadian government explicitly warns that the process to issue that temporary replacement document takes up to 10 working days.
10 days? That's 2 full weeks if you count the weekends.
Exactly. 10 working days during which you must remain in Cuba entirely at your own expense. And remember the context here. This is a country facing a severe, chronic shortage of food, fuel, and medication. You are stranded in an economic crisis.
That is awful.
And to make matters infinitely worse, the Cuban banking system, due to international sanctions, completely rejects any credit cards affiliated with U.S. banks.
Oh, wow. So if your primary card was stolen with your PR card and your backup credit card in your suitcase happens to be a U.S.-branded Visa or MasterCard, it won't work at the ATM. It won't work at the hotel.
It is a useless piece of plastic. You are administratively trapped, bleeding money on extended hotel stays in a severe economic crisis with potentially zero way to electronically access your own funds back in Canada. It is a nightmare scenario born entirely of bureaucracy.
That is harrowing. And looking at the Dominican Republic right now, the administrative traps there seem just as terrifying, but with an added layer of criminal extortion.
The Dominican Republic is incredibly tense right now due to the total militarized closure of its land border with Haiti. The security environment in those border towns is highly unpredictable, and the military response is aggressive.
But the tourist risk is different.
Yes, the niche risk that directly targets the average tourist involves a terrifying exploitation of local law by what the advisory explicitly refers to as pirate lawyers.
Pirate lawyers. That sounds like a villain from a bad 1980s movie. It sounds almost funny until you realize what they actually do.
It sounds hilarious until you are the one sitting in the police station. Here is how it actually plays out. Under Dominican law, any person involved in an incident, such as a serious car accident or an accusation of a crime, can be legally detained by the police for 48 hours without being formally charged with anything.
Any incident.
Yes, any car accident with an injury is immediately treated as a criminal investigation.
So you rent a scooter, someone hits you, and suddenly you are detained in a foreign jail cell for 2 days while they investigate.
Yes, and while you are sitting in that cell in a profound state of panic cut off from your family, these unethical pirate lawyers wait near the police stations. They prey on detained foreigners.
Oh.
They bypass standard protocols, approach you in your cell, and offer to expedite your release and navigate the complex Dominican legal system for exorbitant, heavily extortionate upfront cash fees.
Because they know you are terrified and will pay anything to get out of a foreign jail.
Yep.
So administrative compliance and deeply understanding the local legal timelines is literally a matter of freedom versus extortionate detention.
Exactly.
But there's one more border we have to discuss. It is a border that is entirely invisible. It bypasses physical checkpoints, facial recognition, and passport control entirely. And that is the rapidly rising threat of biosecurity and global health risks.
This is a critical evolution in how we view risk. We have to look closely at the 2026 travel health notices issued by the Public Health Agency of Canada, PHAC, and the CDC in the United States.
It's wild.
Biosecurity is no longer a niche concern for epidemiologists. It has become a major foundational component of basic travel planning.
Looking at the global map of active outbreaks for 2026, it is deeply intimidating. We have Level 2 health notices, which legally mandate practicing enhanced health precautions for severe pathogens like Ebola and mpox spreading rapidly across several African nations, specifically the Democratic Republic of Congo and Kenya.
The data on those is very concerning.
There's a new Level 2 notice for the Aura pouch virus, a debilitating insect-borne disease sweeping through Cuba and Panama, and there is an alarming global Level 2 warning for the resurgence of polio.
The dengue fever situation is also particularly concerning right now. It is currently categorized as a Level 1 notice, but the transmission activity is spiking significantly and aggressively across the Caribbean and the Americas.
Why is it spiking so much?
The peak risk for dengue transmission directly coincides with the regional hurricane season, when massive amounts of standing water create perfect breeding grounds for the mosquitoes that carry it. Beyond that, there are widespread global warnings regarding highly contagious outbreaks of measles and new strains of avian influenza.
And what's fascinating is how these invisible health risks suddenly intersect with the rigid border bureaucracy we just talked about. For example, India has implemented incredibly strict rules regarding polio.
They have. Because of the global resurgence, if you are attempting to enter India and you are arriving from or have recently transited through specific high-risk countries, the advisory lists Pakistan, Syria, and Kenya, among others, you are legally mandated to provide physical, documented proof of a recent polio vaccination.
And if you don't have the paperwork?
You don't get in. It is a hard biometric border. But perhaps the most terrifying detail hidden in the depths of these health advisories involves the reliability of the local medical infrastructure itself when you are in a crisis.
In India, right?
Yes. In India, there is a specific urgent warning issued about counterfeit human rabies vaccine.
Wait, counterfeit rabies vaccines? Are you serious?
I wish I wasn't. The specific brand targeted is the AB-Harab vaccine. Highly sophisticated, utterly ineffective counterfeit versions of this life-saving human rabies vaccine are actively circulating through the medical supply chains in major Indian cities.
Okay, let's play this out because this is horrifying. A listener goes to India. They're walking through a crowded city market and get bitten by a monkey. Or they're in a rural village and get bitten by a stray dog.
Very plausible scenarios.
Rabies is almost 100% fatal once symptoms appear. You have a very short window to get the post-exposure prophylaxis. How are they supposed to navigate a local health crisis when the life-saving medicine the local doctor hands them might be fake water in a vial?
This raises an incredibly important question about our blind reliance on local infrastructure. You cannot simply assume that a foreign hospital, even a private clinic, will have the authentic, high-quality medical supplies you desperately need.
Because the supply chain is corrupted.
The systemic risk has corrupted the medical supply chain. The Canadian government explicitly advises that if you are forced to receive rabies treatment abroad, you must demand comprehensive written records, specific batch and lot numbers, and you should take clear photographs of the actual medication vials and packaging.
To show your doctor back home.
Exactly. Show them to your doctors immediately upon returning to Canada so they can attempt to verify if you actually received the cure.
It also completely changes the calculus on the booming industry of medical tourism. The advisories are basically begging Canadians to do exhaustive, skeptical research before traveling abroad for cheaper cosmetic or elective surgeries.
Yes, the warnings on that are very strong.
Be warned of severe, life-threatening complications, antibiotic-resistant infections, and the stark reality that your provincial health care back home provides almost zero financial coverage for botched surgeries performed abroad.
It underscores exactly why pre-travel medical consultations are no longer an optional luxury for the overly cautious. The standard government advice in 2026 is that you must consult a specialized travel health professional at least 6 weeks before your departure date to ensure you have the proper inoculations and prophylactic medications in your own bag.
Do you bring it yourself?
Yes. Furthermore, having a comprehensive medical evacuation-specific insurance policy is an absolute non-negotiable necessity.
Because if the local medicine is fake, you need to leave.
Exactly. If you develop severe high-altitude pulmonary edema in Mexico City, or you suffer trauma in a region where the blood supply is compromised, or you need to be flown out of a country circulating fake vaccines, you need an airlift.
And that's not cheap.
A dedicated medical evacuation flight, staffed by a critical care team, can easily cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you don't have the specific insurance policy to cover it, you are not getting on that plane.
So taking in all these massive systemic shifts, from geopolitical conflicts, choking off global jet fuel supplies and voiding our insurance policies, to the psychological terror of virtual kidnappings, border agents demanding our phone passwords, the bureaucratic nightmare of losing a PR card, and the terrifying reality of counterfeit biosecurity threats.
It's a lot.
What is the actual playbook here? How does the listener who still wants or needs to travel in 2026 actually do it safely?
The playbook relies entirely on adopting a concept we can call systemic preparedness. The golden age of carefree travel, where you just grab your passport, booked a flight on a whim, and wing the details, is evolving into something much more rigorous.
No more winging it.
Preparedness is no longer just about packing a basic first aid kit and making sure you have the right universal power adapter.
It sounds like it starts long before you pack. It starts as an administrative audit.
Exactly. Step 1 is a ruthless audit of your insurance policies. You must look for those specific fuel-related or regional conflict exclusions. You cannot assume you are covered.
You have to call them.
You need to call your provider and ask explicitly, if my specific airline cancels my flight due to the ongoing global jet fuel shortage and I am stranded, am I financially covered for the delay? Get the answer in writing.
Good advice.
Step 2, create a significant, accessible financial buffer. You need to have access to liquid funds or credit that can comfortably cover an unplanned 1 to 2 week stay in your destination.
Step 3, register with ROCA. Ensure the government at least knows what country you are currently standing in, even if they can't send the cavalry to rescue you.
Step 4 is implementing comprehensive, paranoid cybersecurity. We saw how critical this is with the virtual kidnappings in Mexico and the highly coordinated cybercrime warnings on the transit networks in France.
What does that look like in practice?
Use secure, paid VPNs on public Wi-Fi. Always carry secondary high-capacity battery packs so your phone doesn't die during a crisis. Ensure you have encrypted digital backups of your passport, your ID, and your visas stored securely in a cloud environment that you can access from any terminal, completely separate from your physical devices in case they are seized at a border or stolen on a train.
And then there are the ground-level common sense rules. The Mexico advisory laid these out perfectly, and frankly, they apply almost anywhere in the world right now.
Absolutely.
Do not draw attention to yourself by wearing flashy jewelry or expensive watches. Use only officially authorized cabs, ideally booked directly inside the secure airport terminal, rather than hailing a random car on the street. Never, ever leave your food or drinks unattended. There are prominent warnings across multiple countries about eye drops and potent sedatives being slipped into drinks to facilitate violent robberies or assaults.
Keep a small, manageable amount of cash in your front pocket. That way, if you need to buy water or a coffee on the street, you aren't pulling out a thick wallet containing all your cards in a crowded area. And the golden rule, which has never been more relevant, Never, under any circumstances, agree to carry packages, luggage, or gifts for strangers, especially someone you just met online in a romance context.
It sounds like being a traveler today requires the logistical prep of a corporate mobility manager, the situational awareness of an embassy diplomat, and the cybersecurity protocols of a senior IT tech.
I completely agree, it is a high bar. But knowledge is most valuable when it is deeply understood and practically applied. The vast array of advisories we've discussed today aren't meant to ground you or terrify you into staying home.
No, we don't want to do that.
Strategic, incredibly rewarding, and well-informed travel is highly possible. It just requires a new, mature level of active engagement with your environment. You can no longer be a passive participant in your own journey.
To quickly recap the incredible journey of this deep dive, we started by looking at the macro level, how a conflict near the Strait of Hormuz is physically choking off the global supply of jet fuel, causing massive price surges and a systemic domino effect of rerouted and canceled flights.
Right.
We explored how that logistical breakdown pushed the financial risk completely off the balance sheets of governments and multinational insurers, placing the liability directly onto you, the traveler.
It's all connected.
We mapped out the extreme level 4 zones where diplomatic kidnapping is a highly calculated reality, and then unpacked the deeply sophisticated psychological traps of virtual kidnappings and timeshare frauds in massively popular level 2 spots like Mexico. We navigated the invasive biometric phone searches at the U.S. border, the punishing bureaucratic traps awaiting a lost PR card in Cuba, the pirate lawyers of the Dominican Republic, and finally, the terrifying invisible borders defined by global health outbreaks and counterfeit rabies vaccines.
It is a profoundly dense, complex, and sometimes dark landscape to survey.
But the goal of uncovering all these risks isn't to induce panic. We don't want to leave you with a sense of information overload. Rather, the entire purpose of this deep dive is empowerment.
Exactly.
Knowing the terrain, deeply understanding where the traps are hidden, and how the mechanics of those traps actually work is the ultimate shortcut to being a confident, well-informed global citizen.
You can't successfully navigate a minefield if you don't possess a highly detailed, accurate map of where the mines are buried.
Exactly. But I want to leave you with a final, lingering, provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up. As our world becomes increasingly connected digitally, the physical borders of our planet seem to be throwing up infinitely more complex bureaucratic barriers. What if the future of international travel isn't defined primarily by where you want to go or what you can afford, but rather by the diplomatic strength of your passport, the absolute cleanliness of your digital footprint, and your own personal geopolitical risk tolerance? Will the romantic concept of unplugged, spontaneous international travel soon become a completely inaccessible luxury of the past? The era of throwing a dart at a map and figuring it out when you land is over. You have to be the architect of your own security. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Stay curious, stay informed, and travel safe.